Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising. As we begin a discussion of one of the more seminal works of our contemporary time, work by Whitney Webb called Nation Under Blackmail. I want to begin our discussion of this work by just referencing first Gaza and the Ukraine and asking some fundamental questions. We've seen in Gaza now in its 7th month of an orchestrated genocide by Israel and the United States against the Palestinian people. We've seen the International Criminal Court now raise the specter of indictments against Benjamin Netanyahu and his defense minister Gallant, along with the leadership of Hamas. We have seen President Biden squirming and prevaricating and unsure what he should do. We know, as he stated, that what's going on is just plain wrong. We saw him attempt a little bit of a pause in the weapon shipments to Israel. But the weapon shipments are going on at full throttle. Yesterday, in response to the International Criminal Court, Biden was clear that there was no basis for any charges of crimes against humanity, and that the United States stands firm and condemns the International Criminal Court. The Republicans in the House started a legislative process to actually impose sanctions against the International Criminal Court. I'm not sure what the utility of that is, because the court is a court. It's not a country. It doesn't trade. But that gives you a measure of how passionately the president and the Congress are embracing genocidal policies against the Palestinians, even though doing so may well forfeit for the president the re-election for another 4 years in the Oval Office that he seeks. Polling shows that in every one of the battleground states, Biden is behind Trump. Polls show that large segments of the Democratic Party, the progressive wing, have essentially deserted the president and are severely critical. Polling shows that the young people around the United States, normally pretty well-informed and progressive, are dropping away from the Democratic Party. There's even polling showing now that the Black population, the African-American populations around the United States, are starting to withdraw their support from President Biden. And yet, he doesn't stop. Even when stopping what Israel is doing, following what Ronald Reagan did in 1982, is not only the morally correct thing to do, but the strategically correct thing to do to preserve American credibility in the world and President Biden's credibility as president of the United States. He's choosing to go down as an accomplice of genocide rather than do what it is in his own moral and political self-interest. Extraordinary. And today, we want to explore why. There's a similar situation in Ukraine. It's not in the news much because Ukraine is dramatically losing the war. The Russians are now, after several years of what they call aggressive attrition, they're now on the offensive across the entire battle line. The Ukrainians are losing on an average of 1,000 troops every 24 hours, killed or wounded. It's a slaughter going on in Ukraine. And one would think that in the face of this, the United States would reach out to the Russians and call for a peace conference or a ceasefire or some kind of an accommodation so that the situation can be brought into some semblance of peaceful coexistence, if nothing else. But at no level of the US government or NATO is there any discussion of a ceasefire or negotiations. They are encouraging the Ukrainians to go to war, even though in Ukraine, the recent conscription legislation that was passed was calling for 500,000 new troops to be rushed to the battle front, mostly untrained and ill-equipped, has passed, but they're now saying that they may be able to get 100,000, maybe 120,000 of the 500,000. Why? Because most of the young men in Ukraine have left the country. And there's over 750,000 of them now living abroad. And the Ukrainian government is depriving them of their passports and any legal standing, which is a violation of international law, to try to force them to come back so they can be conscripted. And yet, the United States, in both Palestine and in Ukraine, has no other thought than the escalation and perpetuation of war, even though it's against our self-interest as a country and against the self-interest of the president in terms of his own reelection. So we want to explore, why is this so? What is this toxicity? What is the cancer at the heart of the American polity that motivates and sustains perpetual war for at least the last 75 years since the end of the Second World War, such that the Israel lobby is stronger than the President of the United States, and the military-industrial complex is stronger than the President of the United States. Why? What's actually going on here? That's the question that we want to wrestle with over the next several sessions, but we're not going to do it in consecutive sessions. We're going to have a presentation today, and we're going to talk about crop circles tomorrow, and then we're going to return to it on Thursday, and then we will complete it probably sometime next week, because what you're going to hear is very hard to take in. In reading One Nation Under Blackmail by Whitney Webb, it's one of the few books that I haven't been able to read with alacrity. I keep having to put it down because the information is literally overwhelming. But in order to understand why our president in the United States is acting as he is, this material is essential information, as painful as it might be. I'd like to conclude by just saying that I know a little bit of the power and the coercive force of this very complex phenomenon at the heart of the American government and corporate sector. I remember when back in the late 1970s, I was working with Danny Sheehan, who you've heard on this program many times. We were working on the Karen Silkwood case, and we began to notice that as we became aware of certain witnesses or certain people that were involved, and Danny would get court permission for a deposition, all of a sudden, suddenly and mysteriously, the potential witness would die. And it happened at least 3 separate times. I was working up at Harvard, actually, during part of that time, and it was Thanksgiving in 1978, and I get a call from Danny, who was in Washington, and he said, Jim, get down to Washington as soon as you can. The White House called earlier today saying that they're going to start killing our investigators unless we stop. I flew down immediately, and we went off-site for a couple of days, pondering that the Carter White House would take such extreme measures against little citizen activists like, Danny Sheehan and Jim Garrison and others that were working on the team. And so that was an extraordinarily both unnerving but educative experience for me, because I was able, because of the social justice work that we were doing, to brush against the heart of darkness. We referred to it in our discussions around the UFO phenomenon and the most closely held secret, certainly in American history, if not modern history. We've talked about it in various ways, but normally we just name it. We don't go into detail. So over the next several sessions, we're going to go into detail. And I'm very grateful for the work that Linda White, one of our own graduate students at Ubiquity University, has done on this matter, studying One Nation Under Blackmail, drawing from her own personal experience, conducting further research. And so you're familiar with Linda. She's been on our program a number of times. But today we're going to ponder what forces are more powerful than the president. Where did they come from? How do they operate? Who are the personalities that govern this deep state, state within a state, or as Richard Dolan calls it, the breakaway civilization? Who are these people? And what motivates them? What did they do? So thank you, everyone, for joining Humanity Rising. These are challenging times, and so we want to go as deeply as we can into the heart of the matter on this point of deep civic interest and importance. So I'd like to welcome Linda White. You all know her. She's been a psychotherapist for over 40 years with a specialty in trauma and personal development and renewal. She's been very engaged with us on the UAP disclosure issue, and is convening with me and others an experiencer circle. And so she's very involved in much of what we're doing. So Linda, I'm going to welcome you and turn the program over to you. She's going to have some PowerPoints over the next couple of days, so you can just kind of take it in. And deeply appreciate, Linda, your courage in bringing this information to our attention.
Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me, Jim. And one of the intentions of my PhD is to bring my work out of the therapy room and out of the recovery rooms and into culture. And, I personally have been in recovery for 38 years from intensity. I was wired for intensity because I was born into what Richard Dolan calls the breakaway system. And yet as a child, it was a wonderful upbringing. I have memories of, chasing salamanders and, tumbleweeds, and I didn't know, and yet, and then there was a 3-year period where what I'm going to be presenting today, my family was in the heart of it, and it changed life dramatically. And we didn't talk about it. It just, that whole culture, you don't talk, you don't trust, and you don't feel. This is right out of the ACOA and recovery literature. So when I found that material, don't talk, don't trust, don't feel, it was like, oh my God, that's military culture. And so what I'm going to be presenting today, it lives in me. This is something that's very familiar to me. But what I'd like to do, I think before we start, I lived in New Zealand for 10 years where I worked as a psychologist, and New Zealand is a bicultural country. There's the Maori, which are the native people, and the Pakeha, which are the Europeans. And what held them together was a treaty. It was called the Treaty of Waitangi. And I feel so blessed to watch how these two different cultures were trying to live in peace. And one of the things that happened is at the beginning of every meeting, we would start and end with prayer and song. Now, I'm not going to sing, but I am going to just share a prayer just to get us started that relates to war. It says, without God, no real victory is ever won. All the military victories of great conquerors have passed into history. The world might be better off without my eyesight, military conquerors. The real victors are within the spiritual realm. He that conquers himself is the greatest, is greater than conquering a city. The real victories are victories over sin and temptation, leading to a victorious and abundant life. Therefore, keep a brave and trusting heart. Face all of your difficulties in the spirit of conquest. Remember that where God is, there is true victory. And that's really what's guided me throughout, my life, is a really, really deep faith in the unseen world. And so I invite everybody to pour a big glass of water and take little sips. And I'm really going to slow this presentation down today. And let me pull up my screen share just a minute here. And so this original presentation was offered last Tuesday as part of the Great Books course at Ubiquity. And
Try to make it full screen.
okay, let's see. Is that full screen?
Yeah, we can still see the slide sequence to the left, at least on my screen. It's
I
not quite
probably
full
am going to
screen.
need, oh no, George Gort, you did tell me how to get rid of that, but I forgot.
No worries. No worries.
Okay.
Let's just
I
keep
think
going.
yeah. I wish I could remember what he said, because it's nice to just do the, let's see. Let me just see here. Yeah, I don't remember.
Yeah, not to
There's a
worry.
button called play.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Stan.
It was on the left-hand side. Sorry, everyone. Technology is not my forte. Oh, there we go. Play in full screen. No? Oh, there we go. It's hidden under the, sorry about this. It's hidden underneath another bar. Oh, well, I'm just going to do it the old-fashioned way until, if I hit okay, I think I'm going to leave the meeting, and I don't want to do that, but there's a bar where I would like to. Well, that's so strange. Okay, I was able to do it. Good.
There we go.
Okay, thank you everyone for your patience. And now it's
There.
asking me to
Yeah, perfect.
approve. Let's see. Stan, how do I hit approve now that I don't have my cursor? Sorry, everyone. Stan? It's asking me, oh, there we go. Okay. Nope, I don't, it's not accessing the slides.
Oh.
Stan, can you
There's
give
little
me,
buttons, at least in my computer, at the lower right of your keyboard where you can just click the arrow pointing down and it'll just change the slides.
that's what I did last time and it's not working. I think I need
Oh, okay.
permission. It was asking, it wanted me to click approve and I don't have access to my cursor now.
Oh, well, then I just go
Let me,
back to where it was.
I don't know how to get there.
Oh,
Let's see. Yeah, I'm locked. Stan,
can
can
you
you,
stop screen share?
there we go. I don't know what I
Yeah.
just did, but okay, good.
No, you
Okay.
just did that.
Okay, we're good to
It's
go.
working.
Okay, thank you,
Perfect.
everyone. Okay. Now I'm totally thrown off, so let me just give me a minute. So as I was saying, this was originally presented at the Great Books course, and I structured it really for the students that would be writing post papers, and in essence, kind of guided them as to my process, as to what I felt was important and then relating it to, personal reflections and in the post paper being able to, indicate that there's an understanding of the material. Last night, I realized we might need a little different context for this. So what I'm going to do is start with giving some background about my PhD and what my relationship to this material is and how I came upon the book. Just a little bit of background. This material is very closely aligned with the paternal side of my family. My great uncle, my father, both of his brothers, all, were involved. But with, the introduction that Jim gave, the maternal side of my family, my grandfather immigrated from Russia just before the Russian Revolution. And my grandmother, her family, she was just a child, but her father came really to avoid poverty from Austria. But my grandmother spoke Ukrainian, so I never was quite sure, what the connection. My understanding is the borders between Russia and Ukraine and Austria changed a lot during the war. And neither of them spoke English when they arrived in America. And so, I have, immigrants from both sides of my family. And so I will be covering volume 1 today, and I'm going to slow it down just to really give you a broad stroke background of the territory. And then we're going to segue into volume 2 on Thursday, which is starting to get into the players, more detail that lead and are connected to Jeffrey Epstein and also the U.S.-Israeli intelligence connection, of which there's a lot of speculation, but my conclusion is he was an asset for both. And he kind of was a middleman. He's not a big fish in all of this, but he had his he was definitely involved in the middle of all of it. And I'll go into next Thursday, I'll go into more detail about his, how he came into this. And my sense is he was groomed also, as was Ghislaine, that there are a lot of victims in this. But the intro to the book that, for the Great Books course, just to kind of tee us up here, One Nation Under Blackmail has been described as an expose on how the world actually works. Volume 1 traces the merging of organized crime and the intelligent networks through the rise of the global arms race. And here again, Jim was talking about, the weapons that we're sending to both the Ukraine and Israel, the international drug trade, which I'm going to go into pretty deeply today, the use of sexual blackmail I'll go into today to influence global leaders. And this is what Jim was alluding to. What I'm not going to cover today, but it's in book one, are the relationships with our presidents, in particular Reagan, Carter, Clinton's. Those were the main ones. Volume two really starts to focus on Jeffrey Epstein as the tip of the iceberg of a global network of deceit, crime that has globally impacted institutions of banking, technology, which I'm going to go into deeply next on Thursday, academia, and politics. Basically, things aren't what they appear to be. The researcher and investigative journalist Whitney Webb skillfully traces a wealth of information and connections that engages the reader in a search for truth mired in conspiracy. Those are my words, because my life has been a lifelong quest of following truth and being able to see the truth in conspiracy, because it was my direct lived experience. So Whitney Webb is on the right. That's a picture of her. And then, of course, Jeffrey Epstein with his island in the Virgin Islands. Whitney Webb she has an amazing ability to distill enormous amounts of data into a clear, concise narrative. It's very well researched and documented with extensive references after every chapter. I think this is why she was able to not be threatened, like many journalists, and I'll get into this today. We've lost a lot of journalists. They've lost their lives, a lot of times, under the guise of suicide for the research they were doing. And of course, there's also Julian Assange, who, is basically being held captive until he goes insane. Her podcast is Unlimited Hangout, and all of her work is there. She has 2 degrees, one in journalism, but the other one is in organic farming. And she was ready to enter the workforce in 2008, and she just says, there was no work. And so she just started writing articles for Mint Press. And then, in essence, these 2 volumes were her starting to compile those articles into a coherent narrative. There's been many, many, many interviews now with Whitney since the book was published, and I really recommend, looking into her work. If the book, it's a very, I couldn't put it down. I did put it down just to reflect on who the different players are and the connections. But as soon as I finished volume 1, I immediately ordered volume 2, and and desired, the conversation with it. She currently lives in Chile. She's the mother of a 4-year-old and an infant. She was actually pregnant when she wrote this book. So my hat goes off to her. I am going to play 5 minutes of a podcast just to introduce you. Now, I don't know how I'm going to, okay. I don't know how to get to the podcast now. Let's see. Oh, here we
Journalist
go.
Whitney Webb has been uncovering the deep state's connection to Jeffrey Epstein. And Jeffrey Epstein is just the beginning, just the tip of the iceberg. In this wide-ranging interview, I sat down with Whitney Webb to discuss not only Jeffrey Epstein, the Clintons, but the deep state mechanism and the mafia that runs all of it. Here's that interview. Today, we're speaking with journalist Whitney Webb. She is the author of the 2-volume book on Jeffrey Epstein called Nation Under Blackmail, the sordid union between intelligence and crime that gave rise to Jeffrey Epstein. Whitney Webb, welcome to the show.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks so much for having me on.
My pleasure. Now, I first learned about you, I think like over a year ago. You were doing an interview with Catherine Austin Fitts. And at the time, I tried to get you on the show, but you said, I can't right now. I'm knee deep in this research on this Epstein book. And I'm glad you said no, because wow, what an amazing work of journalism that you've turned out. I think it's like 1,000 pages. So I'm glad we waited for a long time, because now we get to go through. You were kind enough to send me the books before they were published over the summer. Going through, I have to say it's astonishing. Really is amazing work. And before we even get into it, I want to just tell all of our viewers right now, go to Amazon, or wherever you buy books and just support independent journalism. Buy Whitney's book. And I think it's just an eye-opening piece of journalism. So thank you for your work and thanks for being here.
Okay, I'm gonna play 5 minutes of this, but I wanted to introduce you to Whitney and also, just the background of, I mean, she is so in demand now with podcasts and I mean, the work she's doing is just phenomenal. So
Thanks for taking the time to read it. 1,000 pages isn't exactly a light read, so definitely take some time to get through.
Yeah, I mean, it's dense, but it's incredibly important work, and just take it in chunks, and I think it's so transformative. And I think this is maybe something that people should, we should have our college kids reading books like this, because it wasn't until, I was much older before I really started to dive more deeply into American history and understood. I mean, I was a history major, but the sort of the alternative history and looking at how we've been lied to about a lot of these issues. So I think that this should be maybe standard reading for a lot of people to see how the machine actually works. And it's interesting. There's a lot of topics I want to cover with you today because you're here at an interesting time. There was the anniversary of the JFK assassination, so you're here right around the Thanksgiving holiday time. We just saw the Sam Bankman-Fried story explode with FTX. And then, of course, we had some latest news on the Jeffrey Epstein, Ghislaine Maxwell unsealing of names story. So they all seem, I mean, maybe I'm crazy, but they all sort of seem interrelated somehow. There's a lot of these pieces that seem to connect. Did you find that as you're going through a lot of these different stories at a 30,000-foot level, that a lot of these things have tentacles in each other, that they all sort of connect?
I mean, yeah, to an extent, but you're not, when talking about things that are separated by like several decades, something like FTX and the JFK assassination, it's like a lot of legwork to really point out how you get from the network behind that to like a network behind FTX. And there is some overlap, but what I try and do in the book, right, is show that there was this fusion between intelligence and organized crime that began in the 40s, and that group has evolved over time, but they're still quite active and are involved in a lot of different things. So in terms of like FTX specifically, it's hard to know exactly who was necessarily behind that or who was necessarily backing Sam Bankman-Fried. Right now, I think in their most recent court filings, they moved to block a lot of the other people associated with FTX, aside from Sam Bankman-Fried himself, trying to hide some of those names affiliated with him. And, we can sort of get, we've had a little peek here and there at some of the network behind him, but it's hard to know exactly what was going on. Whereas when you're talking about something like the JFK assassination, you have like, over 70 years or so,
Right.
more or less of, research and time for documents to come out and
Right.
Freedom of Information Act requests. And so it's much easier to piece together something like that than something that's currently like still a developing story like the FTX scandal.
I guess
But
I
what
just
happens,
I was going to say, I sort of see a lot of just similarities in in the cover-ups, the powerful people, the elites that don't want you to have access to this information. I think there's a lot of commonalities between these stories, right?
Yeah, well, if you have a particular network, that's even decentralized, right, and they're able to get away with things decade over decade, they're not going to stop that behavior because of a lack of accountability. And so these particular groups that are affiliated with either organized crime or intelligence or, different power brokers, more often than not, the law doesn't apply to them like it applies to the rest of us. So they're able to sort of get away with certain crimes if they're in bed with the right actors, or if they're benefiting the powerful enough.
Okay, so I just wanted to, that's a very broad stroke overview of what we're going to go more into depth with. Okay, now it's not, there we go. And I liked his line, maybe I'm crazy, however it seems, because that is really, the underbelly of all this, that those that are in the know, if you talk about it, it can be perceived as crazy because it's denied within culture. And then a saying that I've often used with my clients is just because you're paranoid doesn't mean you're not being followed. And, that really comes out of, my experience and my work as a therapist. I don't tend to work with pathology, even though I'm totally clinically trained. I'm always very curious as to people's stories and what it means for them. and helping them integrate it back into a culture that for whatever reason may have marginalized it. So in essence, it's discerning truth from conspiracy is what we're going to be looking at here. And when I presented on Tuesday, there were two questions that came up at the end that I just wanted to address briefly. The first one was how to, these are my words, but how to host the intensity of the material. The actual question was how to read it without disassociating. And of course, that's a psychological term. And, you know, disassociation is actually a very wise strategy. You know, it's like the shock absorber for the psyche or the soul. And so to honor that, you know, if it's too much, you know, again, take it in small pieces. But I think it's really important, you know, this is one of the first thing I teach clients when I work with them is the first step is awareness. And then after awareness, we can start looking at alternatives. And then third, we can start taking action. And then I also, I was introduced to the anonymous recovery programs in my master's work. And I was just in awe of the honesty and the transparent disclosure. Because again, I come from a family and a culture where you didn't talk, you know, it was a very secretive culture. And so I very much use that model in my work. And I've defined addiction as looking away. And recovery basically is facing your fear, you know, coming into right relationship with power. Because what we're going to be looking at now is the wrong use of power. But we all have within us an inherent power that we can bring, and that's the power of our truth and sharing that with another person. In the recovery rooms, there's an acronym for fear from an addictive perspective. I don't want to use the word that's used most, forget everything. I wanted to clean it up, forget everything and run. You can use your own imagination of what the F could stand for otherwise. And in recovery, it's face everything and recover. And so that's a very simple way to look at how to bookend, you know, what we're going to be talking about, you know, just to have the courage to look and see what's there and to step back when you need to. Myself, even preparing this material, you know, today's a beautiful spring day in Maine, and we have a very long winter. So, and I just, you know, I'd been working on this morning and I went and I just sat outside and it's just so beautiful and peaceful. And it's easy to forget, you know, that many people are living in absolute fear and terror, you know, with some of the information they have. And what I will share is as recent as this week, you know, with the UFO disclosure, somebody who's very, you know, he's dedicated his life in service, you know, to the military and the intelligence community. And, you know, he made a statement, you know, if anything happens to me, I didn't suicide. And that's something I know very well. You know, I've actually said that to friends of mine, you know, that know the depth of what I'm in recovery from. And even in my dissertation, I've had two different people, you know, warn me, be careful what you share. And I'm not at this point, I have compassion, you know, for those that will take another person's life, you know, for money. And so what I think what the antidote is to bring it into relational resonance, which is what we're doing today. And I'm very grateful, you know, for Dr. Garrison for holding this collective field so that I can step into it and not have to hold this myself. I can just present an awareness that I have and with the intention of starting a conversation, you know, and through the conversation, we'll build a collective. And Jim ended you know, our work on Tuesday by saying the work he and Danny Sheehan have done is they don't confront evil directly, but they shine a bigger light by forming citizens disclosure. And, you know, that's what we're doing here today. You know, we're creating a bigger field of conscious awareness so that we can meet the truth, you know, that sometimes is absolutely terrifying. The other question was about good and evil. So I just want to simplify that for our work today, with good being in alignment with truth, and evil is a descent into untruth or lies. And, you know, I do believe there is pure evil, but that it's just the lie that needs to be brought into the light. And I was very blessed, going back to relational resonance for a moment. I had a mentor for 22 years, and our most frequent conversation that we had was about good and evil, because in my teens and my 20s, I just wanted everything, it was all about positive thinking and compulsive exercise and just looking at the good in life. And it wasn't until I was 30 that I really was able, and it was through my academic studies and honestly being introduced, as a graduate student who needed to attend the anonymous meetings, that I was exposed to honest, transparent truth telling. And I was just in awe. I mean, I just couldn't believe, that people were talking about what I, feel is the shadow, of human nature. And that's, 38 years later, I think that's going to be the solution moving forward. And it's the gist of my dissertation, which I'll get into in just a minute. I'm going to play one more 1-minute clip. I didn't play this on Tuesday because I was worried about time. But in essence, Whitney Webb answers this too, that the interviewer asks basically how to come into right relationship to this work that is so dense. And so I'll just play.
All of
This is the reason why I've canceled my doorbell.
Actually, I just want to point this out too. This is such a beautiful example. I listen to a lot of podcasts, and here is a beautiful contrast between going to something very deep and something very profound, and then being interrupted by the marketing commercialism that is just so jarring. And again, I apologize, but there's no way to
Camera subscription. This brand new subscription.
your data. So your data is not your data on Microsoft now.
Okay.
And that is like
and again, I tried to start at the beginning and it keeps going to.
A lot of investors right
Oh,
now
I'm
are
sorry.
sitting on the sidelines thinking they're doing.
Welcome back. Joining me is my most popular, my most requested guest, someone I admire a lot, investigative journalist and author, Whitney Webb. It's been a while. Whitney, thank you so much for coming back.
Of course, my pleasure to be back. Thanks, Natalie.
Well, we have a lot to talk about. You've put out some really interesting articles recently. I heard some of your talks about AI. But you know what? I'm actually going to start this in a very interesting place, because I get so much feedback about my interviews with you. People are like, oh my gosh, we want to hear more from Whitney. And you're literally my most popular guest. And sometimes I hear this feedback. They go, oh my gosh, this woman is so brilliant. That was an amazing interview. Now I'm really depressed about what's happening in the world and where we're all going. I don't know what to do. What do you say to them?
Yeah, I mean, people do sort of get that. I mean, and invariably, if you're being like lied to consistently about what's really happening, and you hear like the other side of what's happening, and that resonates more with you, ultimately, I think that's a positive thing, right? Because if we don't know what's actually going on, we can't fix the problem. And you could argue that like a lot of the lies and deception is to keep people from fixing the problem by thinking the problems are all other things. But it is depressing to have to confront that disconnect between what you thought was going on and what's actually going on. But ultimately, you have to remember too that the reason so much effort and money is poured into deceiving us, it's because we have the power to change it. And
So, and I'm just noticing the time, and I slowed this way down, but now I can't get out of the screen. But, I think she makes a very good point, that, and this is what, this presentation is about, is to just get on board with what is really happening. Whoops. And together, that we can start to confront it. Now, I don't know how to get out of, let's see if I can get out of. I apologize for my lack of technical skill. Let's see. I don't know how to get back. Oh, here, maybe if I come back here. No. I'm going to close this and see if I can come back to the presentation. Oh, no. Oh, I'm so sorry. I don't know. I'm going to stop sharing for a moment.
Yeah, I'm
And
sorry,
start sharing
Linda,
again.
but it's what's happening on your screen is beyond my capacity. So I
Yeah.
apologize
Well,
too.
I think what I'll do, because the next piece, I was just going to talk a little bit about my dissertation, which will bridge. And then maybe on Thursday, I'll go into the book. Maybe today is just really about teeing up why this is so important and preparing our nervous systems, for digesting the information. Because I've been literally working, with this for 55 years. I'm 68, and I first encountered it at the age of 13. Up until then, well, actually about ages 11 to 13, I started experiencing, things that made no sense. And basically, my life work has been understanding it, my own recovery, and to the point now where introducing it to everybody. I really would like to pull this up. Oh, here we go. Okay, excellent. Okay. So basically that was the backdrop. Thank you everyone for being patient. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my PhD, as my relationship to the work. And initially, I had no intention of going into the UFO conspiracy, even though that was the backdrop of it. And then picking up this book by Whitney Webb, I totally have resonance with her work, with my own family situation. And early on in my teens and my 20s, I really relied on bibliotherapy because I didn't know that you could talk about things. And so to find her book, it was really amazing at this point in my dissertation research. But the research is a collaboration between the Academy of Inner Sciences, which is with Dr. Thomas Hubel, and his work is the marriage of inner and outer science. That's what we're tasked with our that portion of the dissertation. And then ubiquity, we're looking at a wisdom tradition and also the recovery of the divine feminine. And the wisdom tradition that I bring to the work, I was raised Catholic, and also I've done a deep dive into Buddhism, Radha and Theosophy. But in the research, I'm actually introducing the anonymous programs as a modern day wisdom tradition. And I really struggled with finding that divine feminine in a topic that's so mired in the patriarchy. And it was finally pointed out to me that the recovery programs are the voice of the feminine. And they're referred to as a fellowship of the spirit that speak the language of the heart. So, that really opened up, it brought in the feminine energy for me. I mean, I was very familiar with it. I just hadn't connected it to, the darkness of this topic. The research proposal was submitted in the fall of 2017 and accepted July 4th in 2018. Synchronistically, in December 2017, the UFO UAP disclosure began with a New York Times article. So then I ended up really doing a double dissertation. And I'll go into that in the next slide. UAP disclosure invited more transparency to what lives in the shadow of US culture. And for the past 5 years, I've been deeply involved in various study groups dedicated to UAP transparency and disclosure. In the summer of 2019, I was doing the core coursework. I had just begun it with a dissertation writing class. And when I introduced my topic, one of my colleagues in that class, she too was raised in military culture, and her experience held resonance with mine. And she was also a military bride. She was married at a very young age, I think age 16. And she asked me if I had seen the docuseries Wormwood, which I had not. And we ended up, in this little Airbnb in Chartres, France, 6 hours of the documentary. And I was riveted. It takes place in 1952. And it was, a version of, my family life, 1967 to 1969. And it was so uncanny because the son, it's told through his eyes, and I had chosen not to do the research on this. I was in Jungian analysis for 5 years and ultimately concluded just to get on with my life. And I'm in awe of the research he did, and I won't go into that today, but it really brought relational resonance to academic research. My topic is UFOs in the national security state, and it's an individuation and recovery process from trauma that's denied within culture. The initial question when I was just skimming the surface was, could the global success of the anonymous recovery programs be an antidote to life-threatening societal ills? And I was going to particularly focus on the economic and healthcare crisis. Some of the, influences that got my attention is we have an $825 billion defense budget in the US. Yet when taxpayers lobby for national health care, the response is, where will the money come from? And to me, that's collective insanity. And I do in my research introduce war as collective addiction. So I'm taking it through the recovery model of war as collective addiction, the collective insanity, the wealthiest nation in the in the world, and we don't even have a national health care system. And then there's 21 trillion of taxpayer dollars that are missing from the Pentagon budget. Where did that money go? The intention was to bring work from one-on-one in the therapeutic relationship and the collective wisdom from the recovery rooms into mainstream cultural narrative. And I'm really grateful to, Ubiquity University and Jim Garrison for the opportunity, because, I presented on Humanity Rising before, just telling a little bit about my family background. And then the Great Books course, to be able to introduce this work, Tuesday and again next month, and now today. And again, I really intentionally wanted to slow it down for Humanity Rising, because when we get into it, it's a lot to take in. I mean, Jim Garrison and I both had the experience of, kind of needing to put the book down and digest it, even though, we're both very familiar with the content. And then recovery, it is referred to as fellowship of the spirit that speaks the language of the heart. And in my research, I refer to it as ARP, or the anonymous recovery programs. And just this morning, because again, I've been deeply into the research, getting ready for next month's presentation. And those that are familiar with the military, there's DARPA, and that's now was going to be HARPA, which is bringing DARPA into the health field. And then Obama changed it to ARPAH. And I just was struck by the Anonymous Recovery Program acronym being in the middle of all that, first with the defense, with the D, the healthcare with the H. And thank you for bearing with me with that, but that's just how my mind kind of works. A personal disclosure, things are not what they appear to be. I come from a transgenerational familial legacy of the intelligence community with connections to the CIA, NSA, and DOD. The paternal familial roots are in both New York City and Canada, which will be in the presentation, which I can see will be happening on Thursday. I've really slowed this down. But many of the players, it takes place. There's a lot happening with New York City and Canada. And again, it was just a synchronicity, but it brought relational resonance, with, what I'm bringing forward and this work. What is considered conspiracy in mainstream culture was lived experience for me, and it informed my life work as a transpersonal and a somatic therapist. And, in any research, it's always helpful to start with defining your terms. So, the overriding umbrella here is discerning truth within conspiracy. And I'm going to read this because I think it really gives a nice overview. A conspiracy is a secret plan or agreement between people called conspirators for an unlawful or harmful purpose, such as murder, treason, or corruption, especially with a political motivation, while keeping their agreement secret from the public or from other people affected by it. In a political sense, conspiracy refers to a group of people united in the goal of subverting established political power structures. This can take the form of altering them or even continually illegally profiteering from certain activities in a way that weakens the establishment with help from various political authorities. That's the essence of what now I will present on Thursday. It was the intention for the talk today, but I think this background is really important just to get on board and to prepare, for what I will present on Thursday. Depending on the circumstances, a conspiracy may also be a crime or a civil wrong. The term generally connotes or implies wrongdoing or illegality on the part of the conspirators. It is commonly believed that people would not need to conspire to engage in activities that were lawful and ethical, or to which no one would object. And I also just want to point out, we're just coming off of 5 weeks of a trial in New York City with a former president who's also been charged with a conspiratorial in very interesting times. And, I really, it just brings even more importance to the work that Whitney Webb has offered us. And I think, it's really worthy of unpacking for the breadth and depth of what she's presented us with. There are some coordinated activities that people engage in with secrecy that are not generally thought of as conspiracies. For example, intelligence agencies such as the American CIA and the British M16 necessarily make plans in secret to spy on suspected enemies of their respective countries and the general populace of its home countries. But this kind of activity is generally not considered to be a conspiracy, so long as their goal is to fulfill their official functions and not something like improperly enriching themselves. And so that's the part of, where I come from, my family background, until we hit up against the illegalities. And, that's really being unpacked now with the UFO disclosure movement that's happening. So I think I'm going to stop here. Just check the time because I think it's about noon. But the Wormwood, I was going to play the Wormwood trailer. It's really intense, but it's only about a minute or two. Jim, I'm going to leave it to your discretion. So this is Thursday, where I'm going to start is where, I really had planned to start today with volume 1. But I'm wondering, Jim, it's only like a minute, the trailer for the Wormwood docuseries, but I think it'll bring the intensity that I'll be unpacking.
Share your screen to play it.
Yeah, I'll play it right now. I just didn't know if it was going to be too much, so.
Oh, cool. But just play it, and then we'll have a discussion.
Okay.
What were you told at the time of your father's death?
I was told that your father has
We can't,
had an accident,
we can hear it, but we can't see anything.
Okay.
but that was the cover story told by the CIA.
There,
My
just get
father
the audio,
was
folks.
an Army scientist.
Wait a minute. What is that, Jim?
Well, there's no visual because you're not.
That's probably because it's a YouTube that I'm playing. So we may not be able to get visual, but I think the audio will be.
Yeah, so just start from the beginning again. It'll
Okay.
just be audio.
Okay. And should I turn the volume up or is the volume good?
That's good.
Okay.
What were you told at the time of your father's death?
I was told that your father has had an accident. But that was the cover story told by the CIA. My father, Frank Olson, was an Army scientist. His research group had a relationship with the CIA. They take him to New York Tuesday morning, early Saturday morning, he's dead. What was my father doing? What was the CIA doing? What happened there?
The released CIA documents deal with a project codenamed MK Ultra. There was in it a story of a CIA experiment on an unwitting civilian who was given LSD. You're the one on stage tonight, Dr. Olson.
You're all a bunch of jokers. This has been the shift from thinking that my father's death was a mysterious suicide to knowing that it was a CIA atrocity.
It's 1975. There were a lot of questions about the integrity of the U.S. government.
The government was so eager to shut this down.
The tragedy that happened to the family was very deep and very real.
Eric's whole life has been sucked into this terrible hole.
The CIA was using LSD on people, but I think the real bad was something worse. He's a man that was profoundly distressed about what he was learning.
Startling new information.
Frank Olson, a former CIA scientist, may have been murdered.
If you thought somebody was detrimental, you would have no problem dealing with it.
But then the question is, who ordered that?
The United States began to do things which put its own democratic institutions in great jeopardy. And my father was in the center of that.
Frank was somebody who has secrets, and he was dangerous. I can't tell you more.
So that is what, when I was entering my PhD program in Chartres, France, I was introduced to. And Frank Olson, this happened in 1952. Let me get my large screen here again. That was 1952. His son, Eric, and it happened in Maryland. It was a CIA retreat place in Maryland, and they were giving them LSD. And his son, Eric, is a Maryland psychologist. I believe he went to Harvard, and he spent his life uncovering the truth. And first, what he found out, the first layer was that they were using LSD. The government admitted that. And then secondly, ultimately, what he found out, I'll go because of time, I'll go to the end. He found that there was a CIA assassination playbook that had been used on his father, that the first rendition, 1952, there were 5 renditions, the last of which was 1969. My father died in 1969. And I believe it was the use of psychological warfare on people that may have been perceived as a security risk. And I know this is, getting into heavy stuff, but this is my life and, what my recovery has been about. There was, as a child, I knew that the Air Force was experimenting with LSD. Now, synchronistically, what I'd like to leave everyone with is that life is for us. This is what I've learned, and that we're given everything we need to handle the depth of this kind of darkness. So as fate would have it, when I was 30, I was program coordinator for a wellness program in Maryland, Baltimore Washington Hospital Center, and my training was by Sandoz Pharmaceuticals. Well, Sandoz Pharmaceuticals is who produced LSD, and the CIA was the largest purchaser of LSD in the 60s. They purchased all of Sandoz LSD and then unwittingly used it on civilians and also on military personnel, prisoners. And I'll get into that a little bit more, not in a lot of detail, but I think it's just the backstroke. So, I was introduced to Wormwood 6 years ago. I was trying to get in touch with Eric Olson, the son. And let me just back up a little bit. Ultimately, there was the Rockefeller report, and the government acknowledged that harm had been done, and the family was awarded $750,000. After Eric's mother died, and interestingly, his mother died 40 years after his father's death, and my mother died 40 years after my father's death. It's just uncanny, the parallel synchronicities. But he had the body exhumed, and there was no way that this man, there was no abrasions on him for having gone through a plate glass window and dropped. But there was a, bash to his head. So they opened it back up, and it was admitted that a court case admitted that everything pointed, to murder. But because they'd already had a settlement, the government wouldn't settle again. It's known as double jeopardy. But anyway, I did try to contact Eric to speak with him, and I found his cousin who lives in New York City, who is a writer, journalist, interestingly, and he's been writing books, fiction books about his nephew or his uncle's demise. And he said Eric just isn't giving interviews anymore. But so I'll pause there. Even that much I think is a lot, for an introduction. But next time I'll be unpacking it, where it started in the 1940s and how organized crime and military intelligence, and this is the important part, legitimate business, all got entwined. And the message that I'd like to leave everyone with is there's goodness in everything. And what we need to do is look for the soul, that is to recover soul, basically, is what this boils down to. Recover the soul in situations that are really challenging to digest. And this circles around to, what Jim introduced with the 2 wars that are going on and the political system. And we've got, a candidate that, has 90 some indictments and all kinds of court cases. And he's, potential lead, to win the presidency. So I'll pause there, and maybe Jim, you can, I had no intention of slowing it down this month, but I think it's important, that.
Well, thank you. And I apologize, everyone, for the technical challenges. This is the one day where Georg, our technical guy, is out sick. And I was unable to be as helpful to Linda as I would have liked. Zoom, with all their upgrades and modifications, gets more and more complicated with each upgrade. And what used to be very simple and straightforward and anybody can do, now you need to be either a rocket scientist or under 25 years old to figure out. So I apologize because it's meant that we've meandered a bit today, everyone, because we couldn't do the slideshow. So anyway, I apologize for that. We will rectify that moving forward. I saw that Ben Levy has offered to help out on some of these technical matters. So Ben, I'll email you after this. Maybe we can set up a call so that we can have backup for these occasions when videos and PowerPoints are the essence of what it is that we're doing. So again, my apologies. But let me just dive in the few minutes we've got remaining, Linda, for you to say a little bit more about your own family, because I think that's at the heart of your interest in Whitney Webb's material in One Nation Under Blackmail. It came out, as you alluded to, but not quite systematically, your own family experience of having father and other relatives deeply immersed in the U.S. intelligence community, and you grew up in that milieu, and so that would be, I think, of interest to our community. What was it like growing up in a family where the primary wage earner was someone who was working for the very forces that Whitney Webb describes in her book?
Right. Well, again, I guess I'll just start with, I came into the world a secret. My father was a midshipman at the U.S. Naval Academy when I was born, and that's totally against the rules. So I was born into a structure that from the beginning, it was kind of
against the rules for him to have children or to be married.
He was married and I was born. My mother took me to his graduation ceremony. But I've since learned that was more common than not, but the secrecy started then. There's all these strict rules and ethical codes, and yet there was like this unspoken code that you could break them as long as you were willing to, take the consequences. And then he went into the Air Force, and what I knew, what I grew up with was SAC nuclear missile bases. So I knew that he was the navigator of B-52
That's the Strategic
bombers.
Air Command.
Right. And also a missile launch commander. And we were in upstate New York, which was the bomber base in the early 1962. And then we moved to Great Falls, Montana, to Malmstrom Air Force Base. And my father was a missile launch commander during the Cuban Missile Crisis. So like I had no idea as a child how charged up my central nervous system was. I mean, I just like blue skies and open spaces and, playing with children. And, we had the military police that kind of, played with us. And, I didn't have any sense, and the other thing that was unique is the chapel on base housed all the different denominations, that depending on what time it was. And so I would go to all the different masses with my friends. And so there was this sense of community and spirituality. And so I didn't know. What I have learned, and I still have not sorted this out, is that the first 2 years of my father, when he transitioned from the Naval Academy to the Air Force, he was trained in the special services, which are the men in black. And his last mission was at NSA. That was his last assignment. And the family, we were told he was going to Vietnam or Thailand. It makes more sense that it was Thailand because that was the B-52 bomber base. But when I got to be in my 20s, there was a group called the Friends of the U.S. War, or the Vietnam War. And I contacted them to join, and there was no record of my father being in Vietnam. So that was kind of the first clue that things weren't quite right. My brothers and I intuitively, and my mother, knew LSD was involved, that he was part of the Air Force experimentation with LSD. And as far as family goes, we didn't talk about it. And to this day, my one brother, he was an ocean engineering was his major, and his first job was with Gould, then Northrop Grumman, and now Oceaneering. And just at Thanksgiving dinner, I asked him, knowing the work Richard Dolan's doing, and he's been working with Navy contracts his whole life. And I said, what do you know about the, underwater craft? And literally he just looked me in the eye. And this is how my family works. He didn't comment. He didn't change the subject. He didn't lie. It was nothing. And that's how my family operates. And so then a couple of weeks ago or a month ago, I sent him an email, and it was about something else. I want to get the family movie films because we've got all this stuff on film somewhere. And I asked again, and again, no response. So that's, how it works. My younger brother, he was born in 62. So he literally was born in Rome, New York. And then as an infant, came to Malmstrom. And he trained in computer science, which I'm going to get into in book 2, the whole technological part of this. My family is just, we're saturated in it. His first job was with Computer Science Corporation, and he worked as a contractor at NSA, which is where Edward Snowden, very similar contracting work Ed Snowden did. After we became civilians, my father was insistent, a family home, waterfront community, built this house, insisted that my mother learn the finances in case something happened to him, and she didn't want to. And Ed Snowden was born and raised in the same county, and the area, I feel very grateful now, is another bubble. It's a civilian bubble of government contractors and, military and spooks. And And when I was living in New Zealand, we would hear about the economic crisis and I'd come back to visit and like nothing had changed. I said to my friends, I'm hearing about this economic crisis, but I don't get any sense that anybody's impacted. And their response was, Linda, we've got all the government contracts. So that $1 billion defense budget, I was living in that bubble before I went to New Zealand. And literally my 10 years in New Zealand, I look at as a detox from the American culture. And when I came back, and I've got dual citizenship, I was going to retire in New Zealand. I never had any intention of coming back to the US, but Spirit had other plans. And here I am today. This is my life mission. I really feel like I've been preparing my whole life for this. But when I came back, again, I looked through a recovery lens. I could not pick up the US values. And this is what I love about Whitney's work. And if you listen to her other podcast, she talks about she couldn't buy into the man, that she too, and it was hard. It was really hard to start all over again in the US culture and not pick up the tools that I know work to be successful and to just follow Spirit. And but what I can tell you is miracles happen. And what I'd like to circle full force. So when I came back into the US culture, my go-to was always academia and bibliotherapy. And whenever I didn't know what to do, I'd get back into school. And I was literally planning on leaving, clinical work and going to seminary. And I spent 2 years in New York at One Spirit in the Integral Mentoring and Ministry program. But I also, in Annapolis, is a college called St. John's College. It's the Great Books. And I registered for a course there. And I found the Great Books course at Ubiquity. And those were, that's what I was that little community I made for myself to saturate in while I was going to figure out what was going on. And, one thing led to the next, to the next, to the next. And here I am on, last Tuesday doing a Great Books call course sharing this. So, and then even a bigger miracle is, Dr. Jim Garrison of Ubiquity University is asked to head the UAP office in Washington, D.C. to assure that there's accountability for disclosure. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. This is the wisdom of life, and this is what I trust. And my whole life, people have said, you're so courageous. And my response is, what choice do you have? Suicide isn't an option. Giving up isn't an option, and I was raised in a family, failure wasn't an option. You just had to work with what you had. And and just keeping with the family, my nieces and nephews knew none of this, knew nothing about any of this. And and again, best schools, they're all either, this really freaked my brother out, because when my nephew got to be of age and was going to go to school, he decided he wanted to be an aeronautical engineer. And my brother said to him, are you sure you don't mean aerospace engineering? And my nephew was adamant, no, aeronautical. Well, my father's master's degree was in aeronautical engineering from Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So, and for those of you that don't know, that's where it's speculated that the craft and the bodies from Roswell were taken. So, and I can, if this is all in my dissertation, I can go on and on and on and on about the synchronicities. I'll share one more synchronicity so 1966, when my father was supposed to go to Vietnam, he was going to go away. And I realized that was a cover now for what he walked into, which again, bumps right up against another part of my crazy family history. It has to do with the CIA. But my parents took a vacation to Puerto Rico. So as part of my research, and again, I'm just kind of asking questions, I thought, I wonder if there's anything the military was doing in Puerto Rico at that time. Was this just a vacation? Or, well, it turns out, and later I did find on my father's DD-214s or 212s, whatever they're called, he had put in to be transferred to Puerto Rico, but instead he was sent to Maryland at NSA and whatever this mission was that he was on. And in Puerto Rico is the biggest, at the time, it's no longer there, but the biggest radio telescope that we had at the time. And I did more research, and there was a director there just for 1 year, 1966. And his background was in extraterrestrial studies. And this radio telescope was designed for communication. And the NSA, there's lots of research with it. So the research is fascinating, but it does take a lot of courage, to go into this. And honestly, Jim, you've given me the courage, the work that you're doing, and with Danny, and it's time. And again, just this week, with Lou Elizondo, I will share this with the group because this is really important. And I'm very discerning. I'm very, very discerning. So people like Lou Elizondo, I really believed in his integrity, but I was curious why he left and started to the Stars Academy. And even though I really trusted his heart, I couldn't help but think there was an ulterior motive, that it was the slow disclosure. And what's important is that Lou headed up the secret Pentagon office of UAP studies research. And then when he started to disclose, they denied that he ever worked in that office. And this is in, 2020, whatever the year was. And it's shocking to me. And just as recent as last week, he made a statement, if anything happens to me, I'm not suicidal. I didn't take my life. And, this is 80 years later, this is going on. So it's really time. You can imagine how many lives have been lost needlessly. And that's my passion, And then the last thing I'll say on this regard is when David Grush gave his testimony to Congress, and for those of you that don't know, David Grush was a whistleblower. He was tasked, with finding out about this as an intelligence officer. And what he found, he too felt that the American public needed to know. And he disclosed it at, U.S. Senate hearing. And he was the same age. He's 37, 38, which is the exact same age. My father was 37 when he died. And, they attacked his sanity. They were trying to discredit him, saying he's had 2 hospitalizations. And the one was after he got back from, I think it was Iraq or Afghanistan. And it was for PTSD. And the second hospitalization was he lost a buddy to suicide. And here again, we've got the stigma of mental health, in our country. And, and that has to change, that when people ask for help, it's not a weakness, it's actually a strength. So, kind of a long answer to your question, but.
No, thank you. I think it was important for people to hear your own personal background because that informs your interest in the book itself and the kind of the shadow side of the U.S. political economy and corporate sector. And again, everyone, we apologize that we ran into some technical issues because I know that several of you have indicated you found us a little confusing today rather than straightforward. Understand that. And on Thursday, Georg will be back and we'll be all buttoned up in terms of the PowerPoint because there's a very systematic way that Linda's going to work through the material over the next several sessions. So I want to thank you, Linda. Linda will join the after chat so you can ask her more questions. And then we'll see you then tomorrow. You can join the after chat. You'll see the link in the chat box. You received it in your Zoom reminder for today. And just as a closing word from me, I think that we're now in a world in which that which has been hidden is becoming more and more explicit. And that is both a testament to its growing malignancy and power, that it no longer fears the light because that's the measure of its control, over the governmental apparatus, particularly in the United States.
Mhm.
It's also simultaneously, and this is the importance of what Linda's going to be sharing over the next couple of days, the first time where real information, real evidence about that which has been hidden for the last 80 years is also coming to the light of day. So like with the UFO issue and, you know, the unidentified anomalous phenomena after being held secret for so many decades, it's now coming into disclosure. If you think about the impact of social media and the internet, it's very hard to keep things secret in today's world, like it was so easy before the internet. So that's both a disadvantage, but it's also an advantage. And at Humanity Rising, we want to bring all this information to you because we believe that it's the truth that sets us free. And it's awareness of the information and what's really going on that really empowers us to make the kind of decisions that we need to make in terms of who we want to lead us and represent us in the corridors of power through our governments, and also how we also personally want to live our lives knowing what we know. And what I admire so much about Linda is she's not afraid to ask. And she went through real traumas when she was a young person. She confronted them. She's become an extraordinary therapist as a result of that, with a specialty in trauma. So we have with us, you know, one of the heroines of our time.
One thing I want to comment to just to reference the confusion, you know, that of today's, that's the nature, that this is a very convoluted, complex web. And part of the strategy
it's also true, yeah,
is to keep everything confused. And so, you know, this is the point of, you know, next week and or next Thursday is really to walk through it step by step. And I'm only taking like several little pieces of it. I mean, it's a huge, complex web. But that is the nature, and that people then start feeling like they're crazy, you know, if they're intuiting things and try to start putting things together. And, you know, as various journalists have found out, if you push too much against the beast, it can be dangerous. So again, we need to shine the light and not be afraid. And actually, if you don't mind, I'm going to tell one more story. It's a courageous story. I think it'll help. Can I just real quick?
Sure.
I was really blessed. I mean, I have really invested so much in studying with some of the best teachers around the world. I've been very, very, very blessed in that regard. And I had the opportunity at one point to study with 3 Nobel Prize laureates. It was the Dalai Lama, Desmond Tutu, and I always forget the man's name from East Timor. But it was 3 days of really being willing.
Jose Ramos Horta.
That's it, yeah. And it was about, what we received was a transmission, and having the courage to speak truth, to be willing to die for truth. And it was really empowering. And what was really beautiful also was they had a children's conference concurrent with it. And each day, one of the laureates was with the children. And at the end of it, the children started an initiative, and they had gathered money, and then the Dalai Lama met them with it. And so I was really empowered. And we're in the van. It was one of those vans that had the seat in the front, you know, front, middle, and back. And I didn't even notice in the front seat in the middle was a man in the Air Force uniform. And I'm in the back, and we're all chatting, you know, when you've got that buzz from this really high-powered conference, and we're all talking about things, and I don't even know what I shared, but I said something that got this man really ignited, and he turned and literally, you know, I went into a subtle realm experience with this, but so I'm going to describe it from that place, but literally he moved like he was one piece, like he didn't have any flexibility in his body whatsoever. And he looked at me and he said, "You have no right to be talking about what you're talking about." And this, again, this was spirit in the transmission that I had just been given, because I very calmly said, "I don't have any security clearances. I'm just sharing my life experience." But we got to the airport and I went into the ladies' room, and thank God for all the somatic training that I had, because from the core of my being out, I mean, it was just vibrations of fear just releasing from my body. And this went on, for 3, 4, 5 minutes, and it stopped. And that was fear that was not mine. That was fear, through the generations. And so I share that because there are therapeutic processes for this. This is what I've dedicated my life work to. And it's time now to bring it out into culture, and this is a huge risk for me to talk openly. But, Jim, you give me the courage because of the field that you've created of truth. And, I trust the people that you draw, into this collective field. And it's what's needed, as we move forward. So thank you for letting me add that last piece.
Thank you, Linda. You embody courage. Profiles and courage, everyone. That's what we need in our world today. So thanks so much.
I got to say just one more thing too. My dad, after he had sat my mom down and said, you've got to know the finances in case anything happens to me. I remember he pulled me, to the table, and I'm very touched by this, but he gave me a portfolio, and it was the Dreyfus funds with a lion on it, a great big lion. And he said, this is your education. And, this is your financial future. And so that lion and courage lives in my heart. So thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Thank you, everyone. That'll bring us to a close for today. You're welcome to the after chat. And then we'll see you all again here tomorrow, where we're going to take a little excursus to Avesbury in England to look at the crop circles. Then
I'd like to introduce a friend, though. Really quickly, I want to introduce a friend. J. Paul introduced me to crop circles, and he is the cousin of Neil Armstrong. Cool. And I want him to be on the call tomorrow, so hopefully he can participate with you all.
Cool. Thank you, Linda. Thank you, everyone. See you tomorrow. Bye for now.